Okay, today we're going to go into doing a dog, and or what I like to call a quadruped, because dogs are obviously different than humans. They have four legs, and so what I'm going to do is basically start with pretty much the same way that I learned dogs. I mean, I learned at the Disney Studios. We were working on The Fox and the Hound. Actually, before that, we worked on a film called The Small One. And we had Mark Davis, who was one of the preeminent animators from Disney at the time, come in and sort of give us an approach to how to see or how to understand dogs. Because a lot of times with the fur and with everything else and the tail and the way everything works, you can get really confused. So let me get into this right away, and I'm going to start to show you basically how, on an overall approach, we start to look at a quadruped or a dog. Basically, you start off, you have to sort of have the connection here between where the head's going to be and where the tail's going to be. And you look at the chest sort of as a separate piece like this, and then we work into where the butt is. And so this kind of is a simplified way to doing it. In some ways, you could almost, as if you were doing a wire sculpture, you could sit there and take if this is the ground element, you could almost take a point here and wrap it around this, and take another point here and sort of, wrap it around here like that. And there you would have, his right front and his left front and his right rear and his left rear. And so now you can start to sort of very almost Picasso-ish, because it's very simplified lines, start to see the formation of how the dog is going to be coming. I'm already going to start to put, the head kind of concept in there, because as we'll get into this, to me, you have to start to see the overall in a very general, loose terms, because this becomes sort of your armature, sort of like I said before, like wire sculpture. You want to be able to grasp the whole thing. The perfect situation is if you can visualize it in your mind first. And that is always the best, because if you can kind of see it here, as Eric Larson used to tell me, you have to see it before you can draw it. Even if you're looking at a photograph or an image of something that you might take of your pet, or something that you see when you go to the zoo or just anywhere. It's always good to have a visualization of something that you're going to be cartooning. And again, this is a cartoon. This is not a real dog, but it's based on real principles. So what happens here with the dog is that I know that I have the chest cavity here, and I know that generally I'm going to have the waist here. Now, dogs have an interesting thing, is that they have basically their scapula or shoulders basically go vertically down. So what I do usually is I make a joint to where the shoulder is, down here to where the heel would be. This is the elbow. And then I go straight down to where the padding of the foot would be. I'm going to take and wrap this around the other side here and do the same thing over here. Pull this down and then have this come over here like this. So now that becomes, now I have the foot, this is where it's leading down to the foot. I'm just going to put a circle here so I can kind of see where I'm going. On the other side, you have the hip up here, and this is where it changes. And this is where people get a lot of times confused when you're dealing with quadrupeds, which are basically very difficult type of character to do, but we're going to be simplifying it. You basically have this come down to where the knee would be. I make a little circle here. I'm going to go down to where the heel would be, which would be the back of our foot, our heel, like the Achilles heel, and then go straight down to where the foot would be. And again, I'm going to wrap around this waist, go down here to the knee, back down here to the heel, and then over here like this. Now this is just basically the bone structure. I'm not drawing the bones as you'd see in an anatomical book, but I'm drawing the joints that are actually going to be changes of shape, because that's really what I want to be able to understand, so that if I move them around, I can make those differences. Now dogs have a tendency to be, if you look on the front here, if I sit there and draw a line here like this, the tendency is that they're very more vertical, because gravity is sort of pulling them down, the plumb line, so to speak, as they say when you're doing construction, is very vertical, whereas a human has a chest cavity that is much more sort of wide like this, and then going down to, the hips and like this in just the structure. Then you have your shoulders out here like that. It's very different with the dogs, because these bones here have a tendency to rest on the side, come down here like this into the heel point, and then go out, which is very hard to see in a front point. But you still have to have those joints. You have to have these points here that you're making references to, which is why it's also hard to draw some things in straight on if everything is just vertical. So a lot of times you want to push things to the side, which is what I'm doing here, in the version in the 3/4 perspective is what I call this. Now I want to start to, basically I'm going to rough in where the eye line here. I'm going to sit there and just sort of create a really loose shape here that's going to fit in here like this and go up. And then I'm going to just give him some big floppy ears. I'll sort of just do something like this just so that I have basically a rough idea like that. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start to actually fill it in an interesting way, something that I think is going to be kind of I think would be kind of cool. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to fill in this muscle shape in here and start to give him the little bit of the elbow here, push this elbow back. In other words, this is the shape that I want. I want to pull the chest in here like this. I'm going to take, and where, even though these are the joints, I know that there's muscles here, so I'm going to go over here and push the knee out here. I'm going to give him a little bit of a butt. So I want to push this shape around here. And again, remember, because I'm dealing with this 3/4 perspective, I'm sort of pushing things around. So now I'm going to do that. This is a tension point, just like you would have, in a foot of a person. You have this. Here you have the bone that goes down to the here. Well, this tension point here, the Achilles, as you might have, the famous story of, Achilles' heel and so forth. You have this pulling tendency here, which is pulling. It's a muscle that's in here. So a lot of times it'll come in like this, and you'll get a little bit of a curve. This is a really critical point because when the dog actually sits down, I'm going to do a little bit of a paw here, not a paw, but a rear paw.